Has this ever happened to you? Well, stay tuned. I'll show you how I fixed it. The 3 requirements I had for the shop vac cart were: number 1, mobility; number 2, double as a horizontal work surface or assembly table; and 3, accessibility, because like any other tool that you have to work on to use, it never gets used, and I want to start vacuuming the dust up instead of blowing it around with my compressed air. I'm using 3/4 inch plywood for most of this build, and I used the table saw and the chop saw to cut it down to oversized, and then a jigsaw to take the rim of this 5-gallon bucket off. I need the rim of the 5-gallon bucket for this dust stopper dust separator. Next came a 1/2-inch dado for the 1/2-inch plywood divider between the shop vac and the waste bin compartments. And by cutting these dados before cutting the sides to final width ensures that they'll line up whenever the box comes together. The sides are some random number that was just tall enough to cover the plastic bin that I showed at the beginning of the video. The plastic bin is going to be the waste tote where all the dust goes into, and as long as the filter on the shop vac will not hit the bottom of the box, then the sides are high enough, if that all makes sense. And the box is constructed just using glue and 18 gauge brad nails. Before installing the top, I have to cut some holes in it. And using this Millscraft circle cutting jig, which I can't really recommend, it did cut the holes that would fit the rim of the 5-gallon bucket on one side of that 1/2-inch divider, and on the other side, a hole the size of the shop vac rim. I cut about halfway through this plywood with the circle cutting jig, and then to expedite things a little bit, I finished the circles off with a jigsaw, making sure to stay off of the outside edge that was cut with the router. Then I could use that outside edge and a flush trim bit to clean up the circles and make them uniform. And this piece was the trickiest of the whole build, and it is a 1/8 inch thick ring cut out of 3/4 plywood. I need this ring to be the same size as the rim of that orange rigid container on right next to my elbow, because that is the ring that the top is going to sit down on and create a seal for the vacuum. My number 2 fan, Steve, gifted me this scroll saw with the promise that I would use it, and here I am using it, and it was the perfect tool to cut out the inner ring of this circle. So thanks, Steve. And the bandsaw made quick work of the outer part of the ring. In the molded plastic of the shop vac, they have some alignment tabs that I had to use a razor knife and a chisel to cut out in order for it to properly fit down on my ring. And speaking of the ring, it promptly broke. That was actually to my favor because it was just a tiny bit oversized, and by it breaking and me being able to trim it with a saw, I could get the perfect fit and then glue the pieces back together. Another requirement that I forgot to mention was I didn't want to alter the vacuum to the point that I couldn't put it back on the orange rigid shop vac container in the future if I decided to. So instead of cutting the handles off that snap onto that orange bucket, I used a router and cut a groove that the handle would slide down into the plywood. It's not all the way through, it's maybe 3/8 of an inch deep, but it was enough relief for the handle to go down and the shop vac to seal onto this wooden ring that I'm gluing down to the top now. Well, if you could see past my elbow, you would see that I'm using a hole saw to cut out I think it's a 2.5 inch hole for an elbow to be glued in, making sure that it is on the shop vac side of that 1/2 inch divider. I cut some squares of 3/4 plywood and glued and brad nailed them on each corner to beef it up for these casters. Now these casters are reused from those boxes you see in the background that were part of my miter saw build. Once the ring on the top was dry, I added glue to the 1/2 inch center divider around the sides and the back and added the top. The end facing us is going to be the access panel for the waste bin. A bead of silicone in all the cracks closed up any leaks that might have been hanging out. This thing needs to be as airtight as possible to maintain the maximum suction. Even the little dado ends on the sides, filled those full of silicone as well. The clip of me cutting the ring off of the 5-gallon bucket earlier didn't really show, but I did cut below the first ring, which is flat, and it allowed me to put a bead of silicone on the top and then squish it down and hold the ring in with a few screws. I have 2 of these Dust Stopper Pros. The clear one is the newer version and has a rubber seal inside it that seals on the top of the bucket. I just glued the elbow in with some CA glue. It was a tight fit and it's not coming out. Here I'm working on the waste bin access door, and I'm cutting this out by just raising the saw blade up through each side and then finishing the corners out with a jigsaw. Then at the router table, and using rabbiting bit, I cut I think it's 1/4 inch rabbet. This is to receive the 1/4 inch thick plexiglass that I picked up from the local hardware store. If you look carefully, you can see on the plexiglass says scrap $10. The employees at Lowe's have the ability to mark down things if you ask them, and because this piece didn't have a tag on it, I offered $10 and the guy took it. I think normally it was about 25. So, deal, yay. I rounded the corners instead of squaring off the rabbet because it was just easier on the bandsaw. And then using some more of that silicone and squishing it down, created a seal on the door. You might have noticed that it's painted black. Well, off camera I painted it, and no one likes to watch someone painting or sanding for that matter, so I only show a little bit of that stuff. These are some 3/4 inch screws and washers to hold the plexiglass in place. Once the silicone dried, I'm not sure that it would come out anyway, but just to be sure, I added some screws. Here I'm adding a full-length hinge, a 12-inch hinge, to the door and then attaching it to the box. I've already pre-drilled and fitted and pre-drilled these holes. I just didn't show it on camera. I'm not sure what the actual name of this latch is. It's just a simple little latch I picked up at Lowe's. I think it's made for box lids or something. This weather stripping made for doors and windows has a self-adhesive back. Just peel the paper off and stick it to it. I used a razor knife to cut out 45 degrees each way, or roughly 45 degrees each way, so that I would have a continuous seal there and only have one joint. Watch it squeeze. It has a good seal to it. All right, time to fully assemble the thing. If you noticed, there's no weather stripping on the top of that wooden ring that the shop vac sits on. I did try it without any kind of weather stripping, and it does work, but there was some loss of suction, so off camera I came back and added some of that white weather stripping to the top of that ring, and it greatly improved the suction power. Okay, so the shop vac cart is for the most part complete, and it's time for the obligatory I've got a bucket of sawdust, let's see what this thing can do test. So here we go. Okay, so that seemed to work really well. I'm just letting the vacuum hold this down and pull a tight seal on that. Seems to have plenty of power. I can see through the window. It is getting dusty on the inside, so I'll probably have to clean that. But I can see that most of the sawdust made it into the bin, which is what I was shooting for. The next thing, because the cyclone worked, the dust stopper worked really well. See how much dust is in here. There's a little bit of dust in there, but the majority of it definitely went through here and went into the bin inside. So obviously it's not completed. This video is getting a little long, and I've got some more things that are going on here, as you may be able to see on the side of the video there. So stay tuned for part 2, and as always, please like, subscribe, comment, and mostly, thanks for watching.